You're listening to Cosmic Goblins, a fiction podcast specializing in cosmic horror, dark fantasy, and all things weird fiction. I'm your host, Alex Wolfgang. We've reached the end of 2025, and this episode, our 11th, is the final story of the year. The season's busy, so we're keeping it short and sweet today with Siobhan Gallagher's The Crossing of Abrythine Lake. I like closing the year with this story for several reasons, one of which is that I think it encapsulates things I love about both Cosmic Horror Monthly and Goblins and Galaxies. We have otherworldly tentacle creatures from beyond, a fantastical setting and creatures that hint at a grander world, and the surreal weirdness that we love so dearly here at Randolph Literary Press. I also love the off-kilter tone. It's somehow whimsical and fun, but also dark and sinister, and Gallagher does a great job balancing the two. It was published very recently, in the December issue of Cosmic Horror Monthly. Before we get into the episode, I want to take a moment to say thanks to everyone who has listened to the early episodes of Cosmic Goblins. It's been a huge pleasure to host this podcast, and I can't wait to bring more weird stories, more interviews with authors, and new production elements to the show as the podcast grows throughout 2026. I hope you'll stick around. That said, let's dig into the final story of 2025. Cosmic Goblins presents The Crossing of Abrythine Lake by Siobhan Gallagher. Bergerson Knoll didn't know what was stranger, the lake of tentacles near Abrythine village, or the gnomes who crossed that lake to get to the island at the center. The lake was a new thing. The gnomes were not. According to the villagers, the tentacles had erupted from the ground some 5 years ago. A few at first, but soon becoming numerous. And calling it a lake was not entirely accurate, as there was no water. More like a foggy surface, fluid but much too thick for light to penetrate, that kept the tentacle roots a mystery. The villagers stayed far away from the lake, viewing it as a bad omen, and for good reason. Its shoreline was all cliffs and angles, and one had to be careful the shadow one stepped on wasn't actually a gap, as that was a sure way to break a neck. But that was assuming one could even get near the shores. The tentacles were taller than any of the local trees, thick and striped like the tails of snakes, and, like a snake, they would coil up and strike. The idea of a bridge was, of course, impossible, but the gnomes managed in their own inventive way. Walking on stilts, they crossed the deadly lake of tentacles at noon and returned before sundown. No one knew why, though the villagers were of the opinion that the gnomes were a mad lot. Bergerson, on the other hand, was fascinated by this ritual as well as the lake, and for a young scholar, this strange phenomenon was simply screaming to be studied. So he rented a cabin half a day's walk from the village, and only a few hours' walk from the lake. It was also near a forest where the gnomes resided. On his first day, he made sketches, hundreds of them. He wanted to capture every angle of those wavering tentacles. Did they belong to some monster buried deep underground? Or was this a new biome emerging? He took samples of the grayish-purple grass growing around the lake, which curled similarly to the tentacles, as well as any plant that exhibited an off hue. The sky above the lake also looked different from that hanging over the village, not as bright, even on a cloudless day. Local animals were scarce, as if they'd all evacuated the area. Then there were the gnomes. He spied on them whenever he could, though they seemed to not be a particularly active people. Other than the crossing, they didn't appear outside their tree stump homes. They were all smooth-faced, making it impossible to tell male from female, and always dressed in one-piece outfits with ridiculously tall pointed hats. He left trinkets, gold watches, coins, pretty stones, fresh flowers from the village, anything that might entice them to come out of their homes. But always the next day, he saw that his gifts had been left untouched. Perhaps it was a matter of familiarity. After all, he'd only been here for a short time, and clearly they had little exposure to humans. So he decided to keep his distance, observing their daily crossing and wondering what compelled them to undertake such a feat. There must be something remarkable on that island. Treasure? It would explain why they ignored his gifts. Or maybe they were beyond the need for material goods and went to the island for worship. His mind filled with such exciting thoughts and theories that he scarcely noticed the bump developing on his chest. If it hadn't been for a branch smacking him in the chest, the pain swelled and held for hours thereafter, he might still have been oblivious to it. Examining his sore chest in the cabin's dingy bathroom mirror, he found it near his left armpit. Rather small, but any pressure applied to the area hurt terribly. It must be an infected tick bite. Since he'd been living here, little red bumps and nicks had been appearing on his skin. Ah, the joys of the outdoors. He continued to explore, only much more aware of his chest, and collected samples. One day, he was lucky enough to catch the gnomes building a pair of stilts. They worked together with quick expertise. A dozen gnomes carried a recently cut sapling. Several shaved the sapling down into stilts. Foot grips were glued to the stilts with tree sap. Then, one gnome climbed a tree nearby, while others held the stilts in place beside the tree. The tree-climbing gnome got onto the stilts as nimbly as any acrobat, and walked around on them until it was satisfied. Bergerson half expected a cheer or some form of self-congratulation, but perhaps this was just a mundane chore like any other, for they returned to their homes without a peep. The tree-climbing gnome was the last one out, and in attempt to make contact, Bergerson waved to the little fellow. The gnome regarded him with a stare, had the black, unreadable eyes of a rabbit. Should he speak to the gnome? What would he say? For all his time spent here, he had never really considered that possibility. But it was too late. The moment was gone, along with the gnome. Blast. Later that night, by candlelight, he wrote up 1,000,000 questions for the gnomes. Subconsciously, he touched the tender spot on his chest. And did the bump seem bigger? Should he be concerned? The next day, he visited the village doctor, who swabbed the spot down with alcohol, which stung a good bit. After some finger probing, and him trying not to cry out loud, the doctor informed him that it was fluid buildup and offered to drain it. The very idea made him shudder. Needles. Ugh. He was in good health. The problem would surely go away on its own. Shirtless, standing before the cabin mirror, he held a sewing needle aimed at himself. A worrying purple tinge had crept out from the bump's edges, and he thought, maybe, just maybe, he could drain the bump himself. But no, and the needle fell from trembling fingers. He chopped wood both for fuel and distraction. There was something hypnotic about picking up a block of wood, setting it on the stump, and whack, split in half. In another life, he might have happily been a woodcutter. It was some time before he realized he had guests. Startled, he almost dropped the axe on his foot. 3 gnomes, one no different from the next, all staring up at him, or rather, staring at his chest. Perhaps it was indecent of him to be outside without a shirt on. Hello? He said. How long have you been here? The middle gnome said. Oh, a few months. He thought he would be the one asking questions. How many? Nearly 3, I suppose. They whispered among themselves. Then the middle one said, Ever used stilts? No, never. We'll make you some. Show you how. Is this an invitation? Yes, you'll come with us on the crossing. He wasn't thrilled by the idea, but there was urgent seriousness behind the gnome's words. To flat-out refuse might damage his chances of learning from them. I'm Bergerson Knoll, by the way. May I ask for your names? The middle looked to its companions before answering. Mecca, Glorb, Adul. He, of course, had no way to tell who was who, and instantly regretted the question. He didn't see the gnomes again until they arrived carrying a pair of stilts fit for a human. They were much more interesting in training him than listening to his questions. What a joyless bunch. Yet it made him all the more curious, because this way of life, this daily crossing, seemed to have consumed them. There must be something amazing on that island. Mecha was his instructor, and sat on his foot while he stood on the stilts. He made certain to memorize Mecha's unique characteristics, such as the tongue click that came with saying "stop," or the mastered grumble sigh. Mecha at least showed some humor by snickering at his better attempts. "You must be careful. Those tentacles are faster than you think," Mecha warned him on the afternoon they were to cross. Another gnome joined them, sitting on his other foot, which was good, because he didn't think he could keep himself steady. "You trust me to handle this?" He wanted to go, wanted the answers and knowledge, and yet would have been perfectly happy sitting in the cabin, never to be the wiser. Both gnomes nodded and yanked on his trouser leg. "Ah, go forward." The ground near the lake gave a little under his weight, cushioning the stilts, and his stilts sort of flowed, as if the ground slid back. The other gnomes were far ahead, dodging and maneuvering like a weird ballet. One gnome predicted wrongly where a tentacle might swing, and fell straight down into the abyss-like surface, never to reappear. It should have made him all the more nervous, but instead gave him a moment to collect himself and calculate the path with the largest gaps between tentacles. With long strides, he caught up. He ducked out of the range of one tentacle while swaying to avoid another. The stilts creaked in protest of this abuse. Another swing. Too close. His heart lurched along with the rest of him. His balance tipping. "Lean left," Mecha shouted. He leaned hard, felt two gnomes on his left foot. As soon as the threat passed, the second gnome returned to its position on his right foot. He stood still, catching his breath. "You're terrible at this," Mecha said through a smile. "Come now, give me some credit," Bergerson said. "I know of no other scholar who can do this." "Psh!" Mecha waved for him to continue. Now that the island wasn't hidden behind all the tentacles, he found it unexpectedly dull. A shriveled plot of land, dead grass, bony rocks, bent and crooked trees that bore pruny fruit, and a scummy-looking pond. Did he really cross a lake of tentacles for this? While he rested on the island, the gnomes went to work, collecting fruit, bark, sap, water, whatever they could find. Ah, a shame he didn't bring his instruments, but they were much too bulky, and he had barely mastered the stilts. Mecha handed him a gnome-sized cup filled with pond water. "Drink." "I'm fine, thank you." "Drink," Mecha said, shoving the cup at him. He hid his grimace and gulped the liquid as if downing a shot. It wasn't bad? He dipped the cup into the pond, this time tasting. It had the fresh chill of mountain water, with a tangy berry aftertaste. Mecha handed him fruit, which dissolved in his mouth with buttery savoriness, and the tree sap was just as delightful, if not sweeter. Perhaps there was some value in this place, though not nearly worth the risk. Then again, there was no recognition amongst the gnomes that one of theirs had fallen. "Feel anything?" Mecha asked. "Different, you mean?" Mecha nodded. "Relaxed?" But this answer only disappointed Mecha, who turned away. Should he have said something else? It was so difficult to gauge what did and didn't work for these gnomes. Maybe this place meant much more to them than he realized. But the way they went around methodically collecting things, were the gnomes looking for something? Well, that was it, wasn't it? He'd help them discover whatever they wanted, and in turn, that would help him get answers. Brilliant! At sundown they returned, and he hurried to his cabin. Mecha and the other gnome tagged along, holding on to his trouser legs, which hardly hindered him. He didn't even question why. Maybe it was a sign that they liked him? "So, you're little scientists, he said in jest as he took bags and jars out of boxes. Mecha and the other gnome sat on the floor, legs splayed out. "Yes, we're looking for a cure." "A cure?" "That island is untouched by the tentacles. We want to know why." "A worthy question." He smiled out of sheer excitement. "And I too am curious, which is why I'd like to help." "Can you remove your shirt?" "What?" He halted, awkwardly holding a tower of beakers. You'll help us that way." The gnomes gazed up at him in what he thought was a plea. Well, all right." An unusual request, but he'd humor them. He undid the buttons and slipped out of the sweat-soaked shirt. My God, the bump had grown, almost the size of an egg, and much more purple now. The gnomes stared. Mecca made that grumble sigh. "What is it?" He didn't mean to squeal, but the bump and their reaction. "Every year the lake grows. It's taking over our land, and—" Mecca was the first to remove its hat. Sprouting from atop the gnome's head was a baby tentacle. He gasped, stumbled back into his bed, found his hand touching the bump. Was it a disease? Was he sick now? But the doctor said it was only fluid. He scrambled for his sewing kit, flipped open the lid, took several tries to pick a single needle with his shaking hands. The needle pointed at him. If he could cross a lake of tentacles, he could do this. He had to. He pressed the needle to the bump, squeezed his eyes shut. Warmth gushed out, but it wasn't fluid. And it squirmed. Siobhan Gallagher is a wannabe zombie slayer, currently residing on the side of a mountain in Colorado. Her fiction has appeared in over 40 publications, including On Spec, Podcastle, Abyss and Apex, and Unidentified Funny Objects Anthology. You can find her and more of her work at SiobhanGallagher00.substack.com. Thanks again for listening to Cosmic Goblins. Happy solstice, happy holidays, and we'll see you again in 2026.